Hello and welcome to Politics Today. I am Farooq Patafi. Today we are going to talk about Pakistan-US relations, but don't be deceived by the mere title because the focus will essentially remain the commonality of interest in the region, and that is primarily Afghanistan. As you know, the US forces are withdrawing from Afghanistan, and 11 September is the deadline. In that situation, it seems that Pakistan has really worked hard to actually make the dialogue process or the peace process a reality. While Pakistan has done whatever it could, the things actually seem to be stuck at the intra-Afghan process level, and the shrinking window of time actually seems to threaten that there is going to be some kind of conflict in Afghanistan. That is not all. As you know, Afghanistan has witnessed a lot of internecine warfare, and that was primarily because of one thing. The neighbors of the country have been indulging in proxy wars, and that we saw. The country was actually invaded repeatedly. First, it was invaded by the British, then it was invaded by the Russians or the Soviets, and now the US presence is there. But it seems that the entire structure starts crumbling. I'm talking about the political consensus the moment the foreign elements leave the country. So what exactly is going to happen in coming days? How does this play out in Afghan-Pakistan relationship and Pakistan-US relationship? We are going to talk about all these matters. Before I actually introduce the guests and before I actually show you a report that our team has made, let me also mention that today the US sent PPEs and other equipment for the fight against coronavirus, and one should be gracious and actually say that that was a good gift. But before we actually move forward, let us watch the report that we are going to show you, and then we are going to introduce the panel.
For the past several years, Washington has seen Pakistan purely from the Afghan prism, and there is no indication that the Biden administration will be deviating from that policy. The relationship has largely remained transactional throughout history. However, there has been some convergence of interest regarding the Afghan peace process. Pakistan is still important for the US to conduct a smooth exit from Afghanistan, but also for its post-withdrawal security plans in the region. Apparently, the United States is looking for a strategic alignment similar to the Soviet-Afghan war era. However, Pakistan has strongly denied the claims that it will provide military bases to the US. The Afghan endgame remains tricky with the postponement of the peace conference in Istanbul after the Afghan Taliban's refusal to attend it. This has jeopardized the possibility of the Afghan government and the insurgent group reaching an agreement on the future political setup in Afghanistan before the American withdrawal. A major concern is that the American military's withdrawal could lead Afghanistan to further descend into chaos, fueling a full-scale civil war with India, Russia and Iran backing different factions and dragging Pakistan into another long-drawn conflict. The spillover effect of instability and conflict in Afghanistan could be disastrous, especially for Pakistan.
Right, you have seen the report. Now let me introduce the guest I've got in the studio. In the studio I have with me Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal Saab, an expert on international relations and strategic studies. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. On Skype we are joined by Ambassador Asif Durrani, who's a career diplomat, an expert on international relations and a prolific writer. Also, I can see that Michael Kugelman has joined us. I was earlier told that you're late, but I can see you on the screen. Michael Kugelman, thank you very much for being part of the program as well. Michael Kugelman is an expert on the regional affairs. He's based in DC, Washington, DC, and his valuable input is going to help us a lot. But with your permission, let me start with the studio. Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal. One, when you talk about Pakistan-Afghanistan, Pakistan-US relations, always I have seen that we know that relationship through a third country's reference. Either it is Afghanistan, then Iran, the Soviet Union, sometimes India. Why is it that the two countries cannot talk about each other and be content about it?
I think that Pakistan in the U.S. foreign and strategic policy calculation is always become more significant because of the United States geopolitical pursuits in the global politics.
Okay.
So that's why whenever you see that they try to link Pakistan, starting from the CETO, CENTO, then again our agreements, then first Afghan war, and then recent war on terrorism, Pakistan was made an ally. And when we say ally, it means that it is a more geostrategic kind of a relationship which overshadow or dominate the other kinds of the engagement. Second is that Pakistan was always willing or getting from the United States or expecting from the United States military equipment assistance, and then some kind of our bandwagoning objective was how to balance India within the region. So our focus on the United States was also very much visible what was, and now it's not as such. Second important thing in this context is the Americans approach Pakistan, especially after the end of the Cold War, particularly for Afghanistan. Because from 92 onward, US and the India relations improved in a manner that we were completely out of their focus, more or less, and they were lesser paying attention. But after 9/11, we were declared the major non-NATO ally, and it was only because of Afghanistan. And besides it, of course, Pakistan, United States is one of the biggest trade partner of the Pakistan.
Right.
And our analysts or policy makers never highlighted or explored that area much.
Okay.
And in the future, whatever the contact with the United States will be, it will be more in the non-traditional security domain rather than this traditional security domain, and that we have to make it clear. Though our national security advisor, when met in Geneva, some people, it was again Afghanistan referred.
Right.
If Afghanistan is not there in the current global, you can say, setting or whatever the trends are maturing, I think Pakistan is no more fit in the American strategic calculations because they have no. They are more working on the Quad in this region. And
right. And believe you me, even before Quad, even before the US-India nuclear cooperation or strategic cooperation, this was more or less the kind of language that I used to hear from Pakistani analysts. And I'm talking about past 30 years. Let me go to Michael Kugelman. Michael, thank you very much for joining us once again. Let me ask you about this nature of their relationship. If you look at it, every relationship, whether you say it is a strategic alliance or it is something else, in its essence, everything is particularly a kind of a relationship where everything is calculated and everybody seeks some kind of benefit out of it. Why is it that then Pakistan and the US always talk about transactional relationship, not anything beyond that?
Well, you know, it is definitely a relationship, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There are very few truly strategic relationships, very few strategic partnerships in the world, and certainly in terms of the United States, it doesn't have all that many. So this doesn't mean that a transactional relationship is destined to be bad and not work out, though certainly there are so many dysfunctions and disconnects in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. But look, I mean, clearly it's an issue of limited shared interest. There are and have been a number of convergent interests between the U.S. and Pakistan over the years, going back to the Cold War period and then more recently during this U.S.-led war in Afghanistan. Both the U.S. and Pakistan have felt similarly about the likes of al-Qaeda, and there was some remarkable degrees of cooperation, including on very operational levels, between the U.S. and Pakistan during the early years of the war in Afghanistan to target al-Qaeda. But, you know, as we know, there are limits to these shared interests. I think that the way in which the U.S. and Pakistan look at so many other issues, whether you're talking about India or whether you're talking about a group like the Afghan Taliban, and particularly the Haqqani network faction, there are disconnects and differences. And those differences and disconnects have led to a number of crises and misunderstandings that have really generated a fair amount of mistrust that has lasted up to the present day. And of course, the Biden administration is populated by a number of veterans from the Barack Obama administration, including Biden himself. And the U.S.-Pakistan relationship was in particular crisis during the latter years of the Obama administration, because this is when you had those sharp disconnects and divergences play out very sharply. There were so many different crises, particularly over the 2011-2012 period. So bottom line is that looking at the present, I think that it would be a mistake to think that the two sides can now suddenly essentially set aside all the baggage from the past and come up with a fresh start. Just because of, again, disconnects, and particularly on issues of sequencing. I know Pakistan, of course, wants the U.S. to look at the relationship with Pakistan through a broader lens, particularly through an economic lens, whereas the U.S., even though it's pulling out of Afghanistan, it continues to be focused on that Afghanistan lens. It's looking at, it wants to see how it can work with Pakistan to cooperate on counterterrorism-related matters after the U.S. troop presence is no longer present in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. So that sequencing issue, the U.S., to put it very simply, the U.S. is not opposed to a broader economics-focused relationship with Pakistan, but it's not an immediate priority. It wants to focus on the common security issues first, whereas Pakistan, of course, wants to move into that broader relationship now.
Right.
And given what else the U.S. is looking at, deepening its relationship with India, focusing on this Indo-Pacific strategy, which at the end of the day is a pushback strategy against China, which causes a problem for Pakistan there. There's things don't come together. The puzzle doesn't come together in the right way. And that to me suggests that we should keep our expectations relatively modest about prospects for U.S.-Pakistan relations moving forward.
Right. And this advice is good because I've been hearing it for 30 years. I mean, one should be managing one's expectations, but let me actually bring in Ambassador Asad Zutari Sahab as well. Ambassador Sahab, this relationship, we keep on saying, we keep on managing expectations, but in the end, every decade I check, both the countries actually start working together, and in the end, we see that there are many commonalities. Otherwise, if you talk about the India-US relationship, it can be transactional. It can be called transactional. A, it is a big market. B, it is China-specific because India is supposed to actually contain China. But we don't hear that often. We don't see that it is transactional, and Pakistani relationship on both sides is referred to as transactional. Why so?
Well, I think there's more rhetoric to it, and I think this hype has been raised from the Pakistani side because when they start complaining about the United States, so they call it transactional. Of course, the United States has its own priorities. For instance, if I refer to Michael Kugelman's narrative about counterterrorism, America's counterterrorism strategy. Even while leaving Afghanistan, they still want to be operative there in Afghanistan. So in first place, why the United States is leaving? If there's still a threat of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan. So this is a question. So they are leaving. So if they are leaving, then they want to keep their footprint in Afghanistan. Now, for that matter, I think Pakistan has also evolved its policy about the region. And it is just not Afghanistan. It is about the entire region and the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan, which Pakistan wants to consolidate, because it is Pakistan which has suffered the most in the neighborhood, with 70,000 people losing their lives, both the law enforcement agencies and the civilians in Pakistan. So in that respect, I think now there's a realization just to give priority to your own interests, and that is that there has to be peace in Afghanistan. Now, United States did not enter into a peace agreement with the Taliban. They had a transactional relationship under which United States agreed to leave Afghanistan, and Taliban gave assurances about not giving, bases to Al-Qaeda or Daesh in the territories under their control. So that you can call as a transactional relationship. But at the same time, United States wants to remain engaged in Afghanistan through Ashraf Ghani government. It means they still want to leave a bone of contention in Afghanistan by supporting Ashraf Ghani government and that would mean that there is going to be enmity between Taliban and whatever dispensation is in Afghanistan, whether it is Ashraf Ghani or others, and supported by the United States. So I think there is some kind of dichotomy in the United States policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan and their withdrawal policy. So I think we should see and we should watch it, because this is again, the United States has entered into a transactional relationship with Afghanistan as well. They have entered into transactional relationship with the Taliban, while they recognize, even if grudgingly, that the Taliban are a substantive stakeholder in the game in Afghanistan. So it is still a confusing thing. It is still evolving, and I think Pakistan should also should not jump to the conclusion that with the withdrawal of the United States, we'll have some different kind of a relationship. I think it will continue. There'll be ups and downs, but at the same time, I think the economic part has been stable over the years, and it is going to continue. But it also depends that how the otherwise security situation emerges, because while announcing the withdrawal of the American troops, President Biden also specifically said that while we are withdrawing from Afghanistan, our next so-called front, not in so many words, our next front would be China. We will be competing with China. So it means that now they are shifting the scene from Afghanistan to China. Now, what kind of a relationship or what kind of a scenario emerges with China, including the Indian factor and expectation from India to counter China? I think this is going to be interesting in the coming days and weeks and months.
Right.
Yes.
That's a good point, sir. There is a reason I actually brought up the transactional aspect, Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal. On one side, the question is that every time there is a new agreement, for example, after 9/11, Pakistani president of the time, General Pervez Musharraf, actually committed to doing a lot of things. And at that time, people compared this situation to how Egypt had actually bargained for the waiver of its foreign debt, right? And later on, we saw how China actually got relief through IMF when they were going to attack Iraq. But there we saw transactional aspects. In our case, the president of Pakistan at that time says that it doesn't look good that we are going to talk about money. We are cooperating. Regardless of what happened later, how much investment was made, it seems that even in transactions, we are not that much effective, are we?
No, it's a wrong way of looking when the Egypt versus Egypt, US and the US Pakistan. Right. We have to not forget that after the 9/11, the situation was entirely changed. Okay. United Nations Security Council passed the resolution. America declared war. The Senate approved that treaty. Okay. And unlike historically, India agreed to provide them bases. Srinagar base was announced, and Americans were in a fix whether they can use the Pacific Command as a main or a central command, but though this Afghanistan comes under the domain of historically in the central command, so and they went. Okay. Pakistan hadn't any capability at that time to interrupt or intercept any violation of his fly. Yeah. So I think these were the realities which journal calculated and immediately agreed. Okay. So these were the realities. So when you are
the first Gulf War, Egypt was very powerful, or there was some kind of negotiation?
Look, please.
Iraq war?
No, wait a minute.
Was Turkey very powerful, or it still had some kind of leeway? So negotiation.
No. People, when you make like this kind of a comparison, you fail to understand. Sure. Pakistan is a state with the two unsettled borders, and a bigger neighbor is strategic rival of the country. And Pakistan always bandwagon United States for balancing it. Now we are not bandwagoning, and if something happened now situation will be entirely different. So it's easier to make a comparison, but when we go with a critical examination, it's not possible. Second, Egypt, whether it was strong or not, Egypt was a part of the American alliance, Camp David, XY. There were many things. So I'm not interested to go into this comparison.
No, but at the start you mentioned Cito, Cento.
Yeah, why we went to the Cito Cento?
Yeah.
Have you imagined that we were the members of the Cento and we hadn't maintained any Western posture of our armed forces?
Right.
So try to see, we were member only to get something.
No, of course, my concern has been, and it still is, that what I call unbearable lightness of being, that Pakistan does not actually understand its own value, and then always talks about third countries,
No, my understanding, I differ with you, completely differ.
Okay.
My understanding is Pakistan understands its value, but Pakistan also understands its need. Till the nuclear explosion, and especially till 2011 Salala tragedy, Pakistan was living with this syndrome that we have to need American assistance by all means. So we were trying to engage, though we were one of the most sanctioned states from 79 onward. And when there was sanction, and those sanctions were removed because of Afghanistan. And again, after 92, we started facing trouble with the United States, and again, the aid started coming because of the Afghanistan. So whether we are significant or not, whether we are a pivotal state, yes, we are a pivotal state. Pakistan is a pivotal state in the Euro-Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, South Asia. But despite that, Pakistan's needs, or why the United States need it. Today when we say pivotal state, for Chinese, CPAC or for their corridor policy, it's a pivotal state. For the Americans, you were always, first to maintain a buffer with Russia. When you become a Cito Center, you started with that.
Right.
So that's why if we start saying that the Pakistani policymakers in the past, or they were not a good, you can say, policymakers, or they were not better negotiators, we have to understand that what were the limitations.
Right. And I'm going to actually talk about limitations later also, because we have an ambassador with us. So when I go to him, I'm going to talk about the capacity limitations as well. But let me first go to Michael Kugelman. Michael Kugelman, I remember after President Obama took over, after that Pakistan and the US had these negotiations of various moving parts where we used to actually have a strategic dialogue. Regardless of whether the relationship is transactional or not, there used to be and still are many headers. Pakistan has a population of over 200 million, and that is not a small number. Fifth most populated country in the world. Why is it that both countries cannot create channels which are sustainable for negotiations? For example, if there was a strategic dialogue that could have survived all the ups and downs, perhaps both countries could have built common trust.
Yes, so certainly you make a good point that the strategic dialogue effort initiated during the early years of the Obama administration, I think, represented the high watermark in the long-standing attempts to make the U.S.-Pakistan relationship into a broader strategic relationship. And it worked briefly. You had a number of working groups that entailed discussions on a variety of issues, both security and non-security. But what happened? Well, the security tensions that had always been festering in the relationship, they exploded, and that really torpedoed the strategic dialogue effort. And I know there have been voices in Pakistan that have been calling for the reconstitution of the strategic dialogue. Now, that was not realistic to think that could have happened during the Trump era, because the Trump administration wasn't into strategic dialogue. It was much more focused on tactical discussions, nothing broader. So now we have the Biden administration, which has a number of members that were involved in the strategic dialogue during the Obama years. But I think, again, it gets to something that I had mentioned earlier. There's a disconnect in terms of priorities and preferences. At this point in time, you're not going to get much support or buy-in from senior officials in the Biden administration for reconstituting a strategic dialogue at a moment when the U.S. government is focused laser-like on the Afghanistan situation, and that will certainly remain the case for the immediate term until the pullout is complete. And then beyond that, into the midterm, when the U.S. is trying to transition into a model where it could ensure that it has a counterterrorism capacity when troops are no longer in Afghanistan, and it wants to be talking to Pakistan to explore opportunities for cooperation in that regard. Perhaps after some time, if the U.S. concludes that things are going on a path in Afghanistan in ways that it's encouraged, such as the fact that you have a peace process that starts to pick up with Pakistan's assistance, I wouldn't overstate that possibility. But bottom line is, if the U.S. concludes that it's satisfied with where things are going in its relationship with Pakistan, in the context of cooperation in the peace process in Afghanistan and on counterterrorism, at that point it may be ready to focus more broadly on this issue of strategic dialogue. But I think even that is unlikely, and I think the best thing we could hope for, the most realistic prospect we can hope for, I've repeated this on your show in the past, is to look at the notion of strategic dialogue through non-official channels. Why can't you make efforts to draw on the very impressive people-to-people relations between the two countries so that you can have business leaders, academics, others have sessions, meetings, track two dialogues that then result in recommendations that come out in which both sides can bring these recommendations to the respective governments. I think that may be the best, the most realistic approach at this time. I just don't see any time in the foreseeable future buy-in from the Biden administration to return to the strategic dialogue of the past, especially because they all know on a very direct level what became of that strategic dialogue, how it failed, and why it failed. So I think that's I don't want to be too cynical, but I just want to be candid.
Yeah, but the only reason, Michael, I actually raised this point is that a lot of investments continue to actually take place. For example, not only COVAX and the kind of aid we got today in combating coronavirus, but regarding other things. In education, competition continues. Investment in America still remains Pakistan's #1 trade partner. In energy, in infrastructure, there is investment. So basically, all those headers are there. The only thing is to actually compile them and institutionalize them. That shouldn't be a big problem. If you don't want to call it strategic dialogue, you can call it anything else. But there would at least be some kind of concerted effort to build on the gains that we have made already.
No, you're absolutely right. And, the U.S.-Pakistan bilateral trade volume has set new records in recent years during the Trump administration. I don't want to underplay that very real progress. But the challenge is I just don't think on the U.S. side that you're going to have any type of immediate term buy-in for this notion of identifying some type of mechanism to allow the two sides to build on the gains in the past, focused on the non-security spaces. Certainly, you could look at some potential areas like climate change, which is where both countries are very focused on that issue. But I think that Pakistan got a pretty strong message when the Biden administration did not invite Prime Minister Khan to that global climate change summit, at least not initially. Sort of an indication of where U.S. priorities lie. Cyber security, piracy, these are all areas where I think there could be scope for cooperation, but not necessarily in the bilateral context, maybe more so in a broader multilateral context. Maybe these are areas where the U.S. and Pakistan can work with other countries through broader regional and global channels.
Right. Let me now go back to Ambassador Asif Durrani Sahab. Ambassador Sahab, I've been saving a question for you, and that is about our capacity to capitalize on any relationship. Pakistan, when it comes to the hard power, has always played an important role. May it be Afghan Jihad, during the Afghan Jihad time, and then against the war on terror as well. But it seems that when it comes to benefiting from the overall, aftermath of these events, we actually fail. And there seems to be some kind of concern about our lack of capacity to exploit that situation. We keep on saying that, seeing that people expect that we have to pick a side. For example, Palestine and Israel, India actually can placate both sides. Iran and Arabs, India can manage to do whatever it wants. It doesn't lose any friend. And China and the US also. But whenever it comes to us, there are expectations that we have to pick a side, or otherwise we are stuck in one block or the other.
I think, Farooq, it's always good to have to soul search what went wrong or what are the good points vis-a-vis Pakistan's policy, whether it's the United States or in the region. But I think now one thing is becoming clear, that after having burnt our fingers both after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and after the 9/11, even becoming the non-NATO allies, I think the lesson learned now is, I think, to cool down. And that's why I think emphasis is on geoeconomics rather than on geopolitics. It may take a while to mature, but at the same time, there's very serious thinking going on. And there is not keenness towards strategic dialogue with the United States. Rather, there'll be a preference to have normal relationship, normal economic relationship, or a normal, you can say, a relationship which does not, make more emphasis on security aspect. It may be not fully, but maybe partially. So I think it's now there's a new realization, and that is happening. And when you talk about Afghanistan, so that's an issue on our plate, whether it is the United States is involved or not. There's a symbiotic relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. I've said it earlier, let me repeat it again, that the kind of access which Afghans have to Pakistan, they don't have that access in their own neighborhood, whether it is Iran, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, or China. So almost 50 to 60,000 Afghans struggle every day. So United States perhaps may not have catered that into their calculation while they talked about Afghanistan-Pakistan relationship. Similarly, when we talk about Taliban, now there are 146 Taliban leaders who figured in the 1267 committee, which now is called 1988 committee, the sanctions committee. They have been sanctioned. But the question is, the United States has not tried them in anywhere in the code. Most of their negotiators, Taliban negotiators with whom United States have been negotiating, they were in Guantanamo Bay and they have been negotiated. There are travel bans which have been lifted. So it is United States, they have chosen their partners, whether they were Pakistanis after the 9/11 or they are choosing Taliban as their negotiating partners, and they bypassed the Afghani for that matter. So here we can see the United States being a superpower or being a hyperpower perhaps can afford this kind of a luxury, which we cannot. You talked about the capacity problems and others, those are there. We have those problems. But at the same time, winning the war, or for that matter, being a substantive partner, Pakistan has proven that. But at the same time, we also face two-front situation, whether it is India or India using Afghanistan as a second front for Pakistan. So that is the reason that there are, certain problems we face in Afghanistan. So our priority would be to have peace in Afghanistan, whether it is helped by the United States or the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan or even India, if they see the reason. So it would also benefit Indians if there's peace in Afghanistan. But if they want to continue to use Afghanistan soil against Pakistan, then in that case, I think there will be a problem. So Pakistan is going to respond. So in that, there is not a clear picture. When we talk about the United States, you cannot have mathematical answer with the United States because they have changed their priorities. Now, leaving Afghanistan means that their priority would be shifting elsewhere. They have already made it clear, Mr. Biden and Secretary of State Tony Blinken has already made it clear that it is not going to be kinetic with Afghanistan. It is going to be diplomatic. It is going to be financial assistance. It is going to be, security assistance. But that would be training part. So they have made it as, and then also Mr. Blinken in his interview with the BBC4 on 5th of May made it very clear that now the people who had taken us for a ride to United States or NATO in the neighborhood, and he also included Afghans themselves, he also included Pakistan and other neighbors, including China and Russia. They said they'll have to now pay, and which means that they'll have to play a more responsible role in bringing peace to Afghanistan. So I think these are the priorities which United States has set for itself, and I think the region would be responding accordingly.
Right.
Yes.
Right, sir. But here's a problem. I keep on bringing the discussion back to Pakistan, right, and the US. And there is a reason why I do this. Even now, when we are talking about geoeconomics, it is essentially a vision not merely about Pakistan's economy, which could benefit only directly, but we are talking about the regional consensus of working together. Pakistan has 200 million plus population. It must have needs. It could be a great market as well. And we just heard Michael Kugelman telling us that there is always a space for civilian or citizen level engagement between the two countries, where Pakistani diaspora and Pakistanis can play a role. I want to actually understand whether there are capacity issues in Pakistan's imagination and working or not.
My understanding is, and as I already pointed out, capacity issues or these kind of things are important. We cannot deny, and it's correct that since last 7 decades we developed people-to-people relations very strongly. Pakistan is one of the biggest beneficiary of the American Fulbright program. Here, each and every you can say person who has some kind of the global outlook is a beneficiary of these kind of the programs, I mean in the academic. But it's an important thing. We always think that 200 or 2 million people is 200 million people is very important. Yes, it's too important, but when they're getting a billion people market.
Right.
So you are
India?
India.
1.3 billion? Then there's China, 1.4.
Wait.
They actually...
I fail to understand, and maybe it's a different way of we both have a different when you give the China, have you seen the 2021 assessment report of the US Intel, and the second, the 2040 report, which was 2 reports came in April, 7th April and 9th April.
Okay.
In these 2 reports, categorically they stated the US priority threat or priority to check the threat which is emanating from China.
Right.
In all the US documents, China is now #1 priority threat, and terrorism is #2.
Right.
And in that context, please let me finish it.
But
now.
these reports when were they actually compiled?
They are April 7, 2021, April 9, 2021.
Okay.
Read that document, and before that, try to see when you are looking this. It's easier. We have a space. But Pakistan is not a typical state. It's a state with a strategic significance. Though our government is saying today they are coining geoeconomics, but they fail to understand geoeconomics is important. But which kind of the exports or import we can drive here? So the important thing is try to see the speeches when this virtual conference took place of the Quad on the invitation of the Biden. The 4 speeches of the Australian, Indian, Biden, and the the Japanese Prime Minister, you would find that the things are completely changed. So in this context, if we simply saying, oh, Pakistani diplomats or Pakistani policymakers are not, we have to not look in the realism, in the international relations, we also understand there are structural forces. They have their own dynamics. And in that context, these individuals become just a pawn. And finally, before going to the... Yes, Pakistan and US always cultivated better on the strategic chessboard. Whenever the reality changed, we were out. You are correctly mentioning that we must or we try to emerge on the economic chessboard. We should have some kind of good relations.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you try to cultivate your relations in the economic sector, in the culture sector, in the other sectors, which
Right.
are very well, they are overshadowed.
Okay.
When they put the sanctions on you, when they put, when they try to screw you differently.
And that is the concern that I have. I was reading a book by Dr. Machheimer, and it was about Israeli lobby. And then I keep on hearing about Indian lobby. Where is Pakistani lobby? Why can't we cultivate it? But with due respect, I am told.
With due respect, lobbies have only options when you are domestically or you are more attractive for them.
Right, right.
Strategically, you are no more attractive. So we have to live with this reality.
We have to actually believe in these automatic negative thoughts that keep on whispering in our ears that we are not important enough. I'm told that
I'm not saying you automatic negative thought. I'm just giving you. Please don't use the automatic negative thought referring to my point. I am giving you exact reasoning. I'm giving you the reference. So yes, I said capacity and lobbies are also working.
I'm not attributing it to you.
No, but when you make a sentence after my answer, then definitely you are attributing me.
If you remember, at the start of the program, I just mentioned that these are the voices we keep on hearing, and I was actually bringing it back. It was not a reflection on you, sir. But I had to actually go to Kugelman, but Michael, I'm told that we have run out of time, so we'll pick up this discussion another time. Michael Kugelman, thank you very much for being part of the program. Ambassador Asif Zutani Sahab, thank you very much for your precious time as well. Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal Sahab, always great having you in the show, and always good to spar with you as well. Viewers, you have listened to our participants. As I was saying at the very start, this unbearable lightness of being, as I call it, somehow actually translates into one thing, and that I've seen for 30, 40 years, that I keep on telling you, that somehow we haven't actually been able to calculate what we can do and how useful we can be apart from strategy. Perhaps a national security document, if we have one, might be able to actually tell us what can be done, and that might actually ensure that we don't end up in closed-ended streets, and we can all. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.